to her instantly, so they took to her. But still being reserved in that situation, because she was still one of them, so they were only willing to give so much. And with Jeter, it was unconditional love from moment one. He had nothing to gain. They didn't fear him or his position at all. It was just trust and love from the first moment. And so they really got a lot of support in a lot of different arenas, and I wouldn't trade any of their places. I mean, I think all of them were pivotal to the success that we came up with. Jeter helped their mentor find their words. This is the intuitiveness. This is what he does. This is what these dogs do. And he was such a good boy. He helped them find their words when nobody else could. He had answers for them that their mother didn't have. This program is priceless. And it makes me sad to think that there's kids going through this every day who don't have what my kids have. And they all deserve it. After being victims of such terrible things, this is the least we can do for them, is providing them comfort when they're going to be re-victimized. It's such a hard process to go through. Even in the best of circumstances, even in the most wild circumstances, but it's hard and it's scary. And all the adults try to be so concerned with the child, but they have a job to do. And so I feel like on a lot of levels, the kids are re-victimized. And it's a small price to pay to make sure a child comes out of it on the outside. You know, I mean, it's such a little thing, but it provides such amazing comfort. And I wouldn't do it any other way if I had a choice. It was awesome.
So we've stayed in touch with this family even till today. I'll just go back there. They were so appreciative of how Jeter had helped them that they gave back by raising one of these puppies for Canine Companions for Independence. And the girls have graduated from high school, have been very outspoken about how Jeter made a difference for them among their classmates. They're so proud that they were the first to go into court with a dog like Jeter. And they really attribute a lot of feelings of success and confidence because that experience made them feel stronger during that process. So sadly, Jeter passed away 6 years ago, but I get to see him all the time on these videos, and he, like Sean, has left quite a legacy. And this is his successor. This is Elmer, and that is Sean with Elmer on his lap. So they're all doing quite well. Okay, so Celeste.
So I want to switch and talk about the dogs a little bit before Ellen goes into legal particularities about using the dog. And I really want you please to stop me, raise your hand as we go through this little bit of material about dogs so that we can talk about it. Right now there's 136 dogs like Molly working in the United States and 21 in Canada. And we're really proud of that number as it's improved. Now, we're talking about a really special kind of dog and a kind of use of the dog, and I just wanted to define what we're talking about. The dogs that work in Courthouse Dog programs are all graduates from accredited service dog schools around the United States. We don't train the dogs. They come from Canine Companions or ECAD, or Support Dogs Incorporated in St. Louis. There are dozens of accredited service dog schools, and that's where the dogs come from. Facility dog is a very strange term for this kind of dog. Molly and the other dogs have the same selection and training as a service dog that would work for somebody with a disability. But instead of working with one person, they're paired with a professional. That is, in our case, it's often a victim advocate or a deputy prosecuting attorney. It could be a psychologist like Dr. Crenshaw here. It could be an occupational therapist in a hospital. Someone that is working all day. It's not a volunteer position, and they use the dog to enhance their services for the clients. And of course, we add the caveat that the dog has to be used in such a way as not to disrupt the investigation and prosecution of crime, which would be very important. I put this URL up for you to see. Assistance Dogs International accredits service dog schools, not just in the United States, but around the world. And they're completely transparent. You can look at their manual of accreditation standards. You can look at several pages of standards that a facility dog like Molly has to meet before she graduates. It takes about 2 years. I'm going to tell you what goes into making her. But they define the standards. That is, Molly, unless she's told to do otherwise, stays within 24 inches of her handlers. She does what she's told to do 90% of the time, the first time we say the word. There's lots of standards. She toilets on command, so that there's no fooling around and walking her for 10 minutes to get her to go to the bathroom. And all those things are important in the work, in the legal system. It's a completely different program than a pet therapy dog program. So I just want to tell you what goes into making these kinds of dogs. Oh, this is Karis with his ID badge from the prosecutor's office. The first thing that's real, I'm sorry, was there a question? You just, okay. The first thing that's really, truly important is genetics. And if I had to say just one thing, that's the most important thing. Our advisory board member, who's an applied animal behaviorist, tells us up to 80% of a dog's behavior is based on their genetics. Which is why, if you really want to herd sheep, or you really want to hunt, if you want a dog that does something well, you go to a breeder that creates those sorts of dogs. Like Molly would be a terrible hunting dog because she doesn't really care even about squirrels. No, she was just born that way. She just really doesn't care. So she would not be a good duck hunter. And most of the dogs from the accredited service dog schools come from what's called the North American Breeding Cooperative for service dogs, so that guide dogs for the blind and southeastern guide dogs in Florida and canine companions, they all swap their breeding stock all the time and keep detailed records. Records are kept, Molly's vet records are faxed to canine companions all through her life so that they follow each of their dogs that they breed through their entire life cycle. And so they're always selecting for health and they're always selecting for temperament. And the other important thing, the next most important thing, if you guys are dog people, you already know this, but dogs are learning from the minute they're born. In fact, they're probably learning from before they're born, just like babies come out with already the sounds of their native language being more important to them. Dogs are handled from the very moment of birth. You know, for instance, that they can't see and hear for the first couple of weeks of life, right? But when these puppies are born, they're marked with a color, which is what these funny little marks on these puppies. And that allows them to be very carefully monitored from the very first moment of life, really. And as the dogs go along, most of the service dog schools use a method that was developed by the U.S. military. And the reason the military was interested is they wanted to develop a dog for their use that was very resilient to stress, that loud noise just didn't bother and could work all day and not be afraid. And so a lot of those techniques are used on service dog puppies, and it's a graduated series of stress that neonatal puppies are exposed to. So that, for instance, this sounds terrible, but it's not terrible. So the 1-day-old puppy is put on a cool table for just a minute until it wiggles, and then you pick it up and snuggle. Or you turn it feet up in your hand, and it goes, oh, I don't want to be upside down, and you turn it right side up and snuggle it. So that by stressing them in detailed ways, day after day after day, while they can't see and hear, you're developing a puppy that knows things can get bad, and hey, they get okay again. This is just fine, and it starts immediately. In fact, the breeders have told us one thing they do is they're given a DVD, a CD of sounds, sirens, thunderstorms and all, and they play them at graduated levels while they're raising the puppies, and they play them during eating time. So pretty soon the puppies feel like, oh, siren, where's the food? So it's not bothering them, or doors slamming, or loud noises at all. And so this results in a dog that 7 or 8 weeks of age is ready to go out and see the world, right? It's been handled really well from early ages. And at this point, those of you who raise dogs and know them, for all dog breeds, sometime between 16 weeks and 20 weeks of age, the door closes on that primary socialization period. Puppies are learning early in life what's normal and what's not normal. And you've got to expose them to everything that you want to have normal in their lives. Most of us, I know we were talking about fostering rescue dogs, and it's so sad when you get a rescue dog and like everything's fine, but he's afraid of brooms, or he's afraid of people in cowboy hats, or and it's not necessarily the fact that he's been mistreated, but maybe he's never seen one before. And so it's important when you have a working dog that you get them out and let them see things. So most service dog puppies at 8 weeks of age go to a family or a prison dog program to be socialized, and they get all their obedience. And so this is a guide dog puppy learning that baby ducks are just fine. And this is at our puppy class up in Seattle. We come every week to puppy class when we're raising puppies, and you never know what's going to be there. You come in with your puppy, and there might be slices of pizza on every chair, or there might be chickens running loose, or there might be middle school children playing tennis. And whatever it is, your job is to be the most interesting thing to your puppy and let them learn that that's just part of life. Sometimes there's chickens. So there's chickens today. You just have to pay attention anyway. And this is Zeke, a little puppy we knew. The puppies go to the fire station because I should back up and say, you know, when you have tiny puppies, you don't know what they're going to be good at, right? So for each of these puppies, they might be a good hearing dog when they grow up, or a guide dog, or a service dog, or a facility dog, but you have to get them used to everything. So it's very important if you're in a wheelchair and you have a service dog, or you're blind and you have a service dog, that they not react to firefighters or any kind of first responders and try to protect you from them, right? So all the puppies are taken to the fire station. The firefighters put on all their heavy breathing gear, and they come and feed liver treats to the puppies. So all the rest of the puppies, the dog's life, he thinks, oh, firefighter, mom, let's go see him. So this is a really easy way to impact the puppies when they're tiny. And this is Zeke getting peanut butter in his mouth because he went up metal steps. That's a really scary thing for him. Oh, and these guys, for instance, all the facility dogs, of course, have to be bathed and have their teeth brushed and their nails done all the time. And that has to start early, getting used to that sort of handling. And most important of all for our work is the dogs have to be socialized around children of every age. Those of you who, I don't know if you work at Child Advocacy Center, some of you, or certainly you've seen children in the court system. Our children don't even have the few boundaries that normal children might have. So the dogs have to get used to being hugged, or possibly accidentally fallen over, or have their feet shaken, that
tails
sort of thing.
pulled.
Their tails pulled, sometimes that happens.
Right.
This is a Sacramento puppy class with wind-up toys and kittens and balls, and the dogs are just learning. So these dogs are here doing their long down stay because they know if they ignore that kitten, their owners are about to come trotting over and give them pieces of chicken or steak or string cheese. So they're making the intelligent choice. The kitten means nothing to me. It means nothing. They're doing a really good job learning that. And so this is another important thing. Facility dogs don't eat human food. You know, they've got to ignore it. We have kids running around with all sorts of stuff, and they've got to just completely ignore it. And this is Zeke as a almost grown dog, learning that if he ignores the French fries, he gets steak. So he's making a good choice. And the socialization with children continues all through their life because that's so important. And this goes on, believe it or not, until the puppies, we call them puppies, still they're not even puppies, are somewhere between 14 and 18 months of age. They've gone to obedience class every week, they've had all this socialization, and now they're ready to start training. So now they go back to a campus. This is at National Service Dogs near Toronto. And I don't know if you can even see the dog underneath the bus seat there. But the professional trainers are training the dogs now to be out in public and do their service dog skills, to walk on grates with the air blowing up on them and ignore that sort of thing, testing them around ducks and every situation you can imagine, and teaching the dogs the tasks that they're going to know. The facility dogs come knowing something between 40 and 60 individual commands. To go under a chair, to jump on a table, to put their front feet in somebody's lap, to carry something you give them, etc. And that's what the professional trainers do. They take the dogs out. These are National Service Dog candidates out in a kindergarten playing with the kids and being checked out. So all of that goes on. They're taught their task work to turn lights on and off and that sort of thing. And the dogs are selected. After 18 months of age, the trainers can tell what the dogs will be good at. I hate to break it to those of you who, maybe some dog breeders here, we heard at our conference a couple of years ago the sad news that there is no evidence that puppy temperament tests mean anything. I mean zero. There's no predictive ability, predictive validity in a scientific sense to puppy temperament testing, which is why the service dog schools bring all the dogs in at 18 months, start training them, and then they can tell what is the dog going to be able to do as an adult dog, teaching them to turn lights on and off. All that goes on. And when the dogs get to be somewhere between 20 and 24 months old, they really know how their training is going. Then they get the handler who's been going through an application process gets a call. So for instance, to get an assistance dog like Molly, a facility dog, you typically would go on campus, for instance in Medford, Long Island, with Canine Companions. You would go and live on campus for 2 weeks, and it would take a lot of time and effort during those 2 weeks to learn what you need to know to handle the dog. So we're really talking a professional dog and a professional handler. This is a Canine Companions handler teaching a boy about how to handle their dog. And there is a lot of lecture and learning, so that when you go to your, it's called team training, when you go to handler training, you have to learn how to do their nails and brush their teeth and a lot about first aid, and you've got to know how to handle the dog. Ellen says she wasn't sure she was going to pass the first time.
No. I said, I passed the bar exam. Surely I could do this. And I wasn't sure.
I know. So yes, it's really hard. There's nothing like team training to make you feel like you just know nothing at all.
Right.
But at the end, let me go back. I just wanted to, I'll be talking later about developing a program, but as far as the handler goes, they go through an application to get a dog like Molly that is request an application and feel lucky if you get it. It's a book-length application that you have to fill out and take pictures of your home and videos of your workplace and all. You get through that, and then maybe you get a phone interview that lasts an hour, and then you get invited to campus for an in-person interview that lasts most of a day. And then if you're good enough to pass, then you get put on the waiting list to wait for a dog. And that's the way you get the dog. It takes somewhere between 6 months to a year to go through the process. It's like adopting a child.
But I want to pipe up and say it's a lot of work in the front end, but the first dog that was placed at my courthouse, or in this capacity anywhere in the United States, she worked for 11 years and helped thousands of people during the course of her career.
Right. Yeah, so yeah, it is a lot on the front end.
Right.
And so at the end, we're going to be talking about how to develop a program and select a handler and all, but it is a good bit of work. But I just wanted to talk about one or two other things, if this is okay, Ellen, to go through this before I give you back the mic. One thing we hear from a lot of attorneys is, what about allergies? How could we possibly have a dog at our agency or in our office because so many people have asthma and are allergic to dogs? This is Tucker at a hospital in Hawaii, but it turns out that all the chairs in this room are covered with dog allergens. But they didn't come in with Molly. They came in over the last weeks and months and years from everybody that has pet dogs at home. So the scientific reality is that having a facility dog in a public building doesn't statistically increase the allergenic load for people with allergies. And that's really important, and we can give you the paper to attach to your briefs when you want a dog in the courtroom, because one of the new things is that defense attorneys are telling us my defendant's allergic, or I'm allergic. I can't do a good job as a defense attorney if there's a dog in the courtroom. But actually, those allergenic particles are already there because we have so many pets in our home. And that's why our National Institutes of Health say, bring the dogs in. Doesn't really matter. Another thing that we hear people talking about is that in some parts of the country, a lot of people are afraid of dogs. And so, obviously, when you're the handler of the dog, it's your responsibility that nobody be surprised by your dog. We're gonna, you'll see we advocate for signs on the outside of the building and at your front desk saying that there's a dog in the building. But actually the dogs are fairly inapparent. Molly is really hard to be afraid of unless you actually have a phobia, because she's not really doing anything. But one thing that is important is that a lot of Islamic children can't have dog saliva on their hands. And so if you have a large Muslim population, for your agency, is something you need to be aware of and know when it's a good idea to introduce the dogs. This is an example of an exterior sign that would just warn people, just neutrally, that there's a dog there. And then a lot of child advocacy centers use signs like this to let people know that the dog's not a drug dog. You know, we have had people step back from Molly when we walk her down the hall, and not being afraid, but thinking, don't smell my backpack. But Molly doesn't really care what anybody smells like, so. But
it was a real problem in drug court the
Yeah.
first day that Jeter showed up,
Absolutely.
let me tell you. So. Okay, so there are many applications for these dogs in a courthouse setting. Just being in the lobby area makes a big difference, and if the primary handler has the time and the lobby area looks like it's a very difficult situation. I know in juvenile court there were babies crying and mad parents, and it was not a happy place. And bringing the dog right in there can make an almost instant difference for people there. So I have to say, courthouse security really loves it when the dogs come through. It's a real pick-me-up for them as well. This was a girl that was really, this was a bittersweet adoption day. You think adoptions are happy events, but for this child it wasn't, because it suddenly hit her that her real mother was giving her up for adoption. And that just tore her up. And the judge just assumed that because this was an adoption, it would be a celebration. And when she just fell apart in the courtroom, she called the court administrator, who was the handler for their family court, and said, get Camry here immediately. And so Camry hit the courtroom, spent this time with this girl, cheered her up. The new family interacted with the dog as well, and she was able to go through that proceeding. So they facilitate these proceedings as well. And then they're often used in juvenile court as a way to help the kids engage with the process. This is, again, Marion County in Ohio Family Court, where these kids are on a program where they're checking in with the judge about their progress. And if they haven't done too well, Camry's available for them to pet before there's a sanction attached to that. And it just seems to make it easier. And then this was a young man in family court that had to do some community service around the courthouse, and so he got to comb and groom Camry as part of his community service. And finally, we had these two attorneys in family court that could not get along. They fought each other tooth and nail, and the judge said, you cannot come back here until you can be civil with one another, and it's just not happening. So they called up Kathy Clark, the handler in Marion County, Ohio, and said, we need Camry. And so they spent some time with Camry before their next court appearance. They got through that without any problems at all. And then they took this celebratory photograph of them. So the judge was really true, said a true thing when he said attorneys are better behaved around the dogs. So they just add, at the children's home, it just makes it feel nice to be greeted by a friendly dog like these dogs. And I think people that came in here and saw Molly felt better once they saw her and petted her a bit. But this is where these dogs really make a huge difference above and beyond just what a dog, a nice pet does that lives in one's home. And that's during the investigation of crimes. And for me, this is really, really important, especially when detectives or child advocacy centers have to deal with children that have been sexually assaulted, have been abused and neglected to the point that it's criminal in nature, or they've been through horrible domestic violence, witnessed a parent murdered, etc. These children their brains are not developed enough to handle this, and what they experience at this time can have lifelong damage as a result of this. So having the dogs present right from the beginning, right at the start of this, makes a huge difference. And most of the kids that go to child advocacy centers are going there with a non-offending parent or guardian. And everybody's scared. They know that they're going to talk to somebody about what happened. They don't know this person at all, that mom isn't going to be in there with them when this occurs. And trying to engage in that forensic interview under those circumstances is very difficult. Because if you're not aware of how a forensic interview is conducted, it is clinical. Those interviewers are asking non-leading questions. They have very impassive faces. If the child becomes upset or starts to cry or agitated, they can offer a tissue or a glass of water, but they can't be emotional about it at all because that would taint the interview. It's very difficult for them to do. And when these kids fall apart, that's it. You don't have a statement, you don't have probable cause, you don't have a case, and the offender, if this in fact did happen, continues to reoffend, and this child is still very vulnerable. So what's really nice is having these dogs there from the very moment helps these professionals establish rapport with these children. And so it's nice if there is built-in time, a half an hour or so, for this child to meet with the dog. A lot of the kids color or read to the dog. And this is Blake in Arizona, just starred in the Arizona, our latest appellate court decision out of Arizona. He helped out there and it was approved. And then this is another activity that kids do. These dogs are used to picking up things, and you'll see Molly do that later on. And so this is a puzzle game where the child is engaged in that process. And these dogs are so well trained that it's very easy to teach a child to give the dog commands. And these commands are what the dogs were taught to assist somebody with a disability. We call them tricks, but it's very, very empowering for this child to go from feeling out of control to being there and feeling in control, especially when a dog does what they say. So here's a 4-year-old giving Jeter some commands. So many advocacy centers offer a lot of services, and sometimes that is a forensic medical exam, which is scary. But we've had nurse practitioners and physician assistants say that having the dog involved in that process has cut the exam time in half. A study was done in Norfolk, Virginia that showed those results. You don't really have to worry about the dog's hair tainting the forensic evidence. That really isn't a concern. If they wanted to test the DNA, that would be clear that it was this dog's hair, and not to worry about that. But generally what the dog does is if a child doesn't understand a basic exam, they can use the dog as a prop and listen to the dog's heart. And usually they just lie there on a mat, the child holds the dog's leash, can look down at the dog during the process, and it's much more comfortable for them. But where this really makes a difference is during these forensic interviews. And what we recommend is that the child is as close to the dog as possible. You don't want the dog on the floor and the child sitting in a chair. These children have to be in line of a camera, and if they're leaning over, touching the dog, you're not recording what this child is saying and how they look when they're saying it. So we recommend a love seat or a two-seater or a couch so that the dog can be up there to snuggle with the child. And these dogs know that out in the lobby area, I can play and chase the ball. But the moment I cross that threshold, my job is to get up on that couch, cuddle with that kid, and not distract that child during the interview, because these kids don't want to talk about it. So if they try to play with them, they're just And if a child's very hyperactive, this is a way for forensic interviewers to try to get the child to sit still and listen to the questions by saying, you know, Molly mostly sleeps in here and she loves it. When kids pet her when she's sleeping, could you pet her for me? And that way you get the child seated next to the dog, petting the dog, and people think that, I believe Dr. Crenshaw thinks this and maybe said this to me, I'll give you credit for that petting a dog kind of facilitates talking, they're just very rhythmic pattern there. So, but I just want to touch on some legal things here. Sometimes there are things about a child advocacy center that a defense attorney could justifiably raise some concerns about. Most advocacy centers try to be very child-friendly and appealing, so I just took some things off of the internet or advocacy centers that I know of, just to illustrate how you have to really be concerned that it's child-friendly, but it really is business, because a defense attorney could justifiably say, hey, you know, kids make up things all the time, and when this child entered that advocacy center, it was funhouse time. And quite frankly, this looks like a funhouse to me. So they're well intended, but you have to kind of be careful with what you're portraying there. So in this particular case, this was just loaded. This was in Florida. This was just loaded with stuffed animals. And then I was a little concerned to see this mural on a wall at a child advocacy center. If you're worried about fantasy coming up, when you have a dog reading a book, do dogs read books? No, they don't. But that's what's on the wall there. And here's a kitten playing with a truck. You don't want this child to be subjected to that. It may or may not have that impact. You don't know. But a defense attorney could come into that lobby area and say, you know, this is supposed to be clinical, and this